CLO 4.1, Simple Interest and Maturity Value. Okay, first let me introduce CLO4 just in general. Interest, I'm going to define it as the cost of borrowing money. When you borrow money from a bank and you pay it back later, not only do you have to pay back what you borrowed, you have to pay back even more money on top of that. That more money that you're paying back is called interest. Similarly, if you put money in the bank, it's like the bank is borrowing from you. So they have to pay you back with more money than you put in. So when you take your money out of the bank later, they pay you back in interest. Okay, before I give you the formulas and talk about the difference between simple and compound interest, I just want to explain some of the letters we will be using. We use the letter I to stand for interest, and it's an amount of money. So it's an amount, okay? And then there are two other letters, P and S, that we use a lot. And I want to describe the difference between P and S, because when you see word problems, you will see a lot of different vocab words describing these letters. So P is the present value, and S is the future value. What does that mean? P is the amount that you borrowed, or you can say it's the amount you deposited. Okay, and S would be the amount at the end, whether you repaid it at the end or you took it out of the bank at the end. Present value, future value, amount borrowed and then or deposited, and then the amount at the end. A few other things we say for future value. They sometimes call it maturity value. They sometimes call it the accumulated value. These are all different vocab words which mean the same thing. What else? Sometimes they even say for the starting amount, they might say amount invested. All of these mean the same thing. Okay, let me give you the simple interest formulas that we'll use a lot. I equals PRT. The interest equals the principal, the starting amount, times the rate, times the time. So here is rate, here is time. One thing I want you to notice though is that time is always going to be in years. So if they give you time in months, like if they say 5 months, you have to divide that by 12 in order to get years. If they say time in weeks, you have to divide that by 52 in order to get years. If they say time in days, you have to divide that by 365 days in order to get years. Now there's a few other formulas we will use. The future value equals the principal, the starting value, plus the interest earned. Or we have another equation, the future value S is the principal times 1 plus RT. Remember, time is always in years. So those are the simple interest equations. Now, compound interest, which we'll talk about in another video, it's this idea that when you borrow money, they take the interest, and then if it's not paid, they put it back on the principal, and then the next time they calculate interest, you're getting interest on top of interest. The formulas we will use here are S equals P, 1 plus R over M to the MT. It's much more complicated, and then we'll have the interest is S minus P. We'll deal with that in a later video. So for this video, we'll just deal with the simple interest equations and these important vocab words. And lastly, just going back to this idea of the present value and the future value. The present value, the starting amount, is always going to be less than the future amount. So that's just something to take note of as we do some examples. So let's look at the first example. You deposit 3,000 dirhams. So we're going to say the principal, the starting amount is $3,000, and it earns 6%. It says PA, that means per annum or per year. The rate is 0.06, and it says for 2 years. Time is always in years, so we just say T equals 2. Then they ask, how much interest do you receive? What is the maturity value? So they're asking about the interest, and they're asking about the future value. The maturity value is S. The formula we will use, the first formula, I equals P times R times T. And so we will get 3,000 times the rate 0.06 times the time is 2 years. When we plug that into our calculator, we will get 360 dirhams in interest. Now the second part of the question, they're asking for the maturity value, so we call that S. S is equal to the principal plus the interest earned. The principal is 3,000. The interest earned that we just calculated is 360. So the future value is 3,360 dirhams. So we put 3,000 in the bank, and then later when we took it out, we took out 3,360 dirhams. Okay, let's continue and do some more examples. You borrow 12,000, again, that's going to be the starting amount, P, at a rate of 8%, so rate equals 0.08. When it says PA, that just means per annum or per year. 5 months. Now be careful here. We cannot say T equals 5, that would mean 5 years. So 5 months is 5 over 12. And then they're asking about interest. How much interest do you pay? What's the total amount repaid? So what's the future value? So firstly, we can use this equation, I equals PRT. We will plug in our numbers, 12,000 times 0.08 times 5 over 12, and we will get the interest earned is 400 dirhams. Okay, the second part of the question, we will use this equation. The future value S just equals the principal that you borrowed plus the interest earned. So in this case, 12,000 plus the 400 in interest. The future amount, or the total amount that you have to repay at the end, is going to be 12,400 dirhams. Okay, let's do the second example. You deposit 5,000. Notice there's no difference in calculations whether you deposit or whether you borrow. That's the starting amount, 5,000. We're going to put in the bank. The rate is 4.5% per annum per year, so that means 0.045. And it says 60 days. Now again, we cannot put T equals 60. That would mean 60 years. So 60 days, we say 360, divide by 365. Again, they're asking about the interest and the maturity value, which is S, the future value. So we'll use these same two equations. We'll use I equals PRT. We'll plug in these numbers, 5,000 times 0.045 times 60 over 365, and we will get the interest earned, rounding to 2 decimal places always for money, is 36.99 dirhams. And then if we want to find the maturity value or the future value, it's just the principal that we put in the bank plus the interest earned. And so in this case, 5,000 plus 36.99, we get a future value at the end of the 60 days where my money is worth, is worth 5036.99, 5,036.99 dirhams. Okay, let's look at this question. You deposit $825, that's the starting amount. Okay, they give us the interest rate. Rate is 3.5%, so 0.035. Now this is interesting. They give us dates. January 28th is when you put it in, and you take it out on March 30th. So whenever you see dates, we're going to have to use the Julian calendar to figure out exactly how many days that was, how many days that money was in the bank. So I look here and I see, all right, January 28th is day number 28 of the year, and it goes until March 30th. We leave our money in the bank. So March 30th is day number 89, according to the Julian calendar. And if you subtract those two day numbers, you would get a total of 61 days. So our time, again, we can't say 61, that would mean 61 years. So 61 days we would write as 61 divided by 365. And now we have what we need to answer the question, how much interest? Interest is just P times R times T. So we plug and chug our numbers, 825 times 0.035 times 61 divided by 365. We plug all that in our calculator, and we get that the interest earned in that amount of time was $4.83. Okay, here's one last example. They start with an amount deposited, so that's our starting amount, 20,800 dirhams, into a savings account for 74 weeks. So that's time, and again, you cannot just put 74, that would mean 74 years. But 74 weeks, we'll do 74 divided by 52. The rate is 3.5% per annum, means per year, 0.035. And they're just asking about interest. They're not asking about future value. So we will use this first equation, interest equals PRT, and we will plug in the numbers, 20,800. The rate is 0.035, and the time is 74 divided by 52 weeks in a year. And we get a final answer that the interest earned was 1,036 dirhams. Okay, this question sometimes tricks students. It's actually simpler than it looks, but let's get started. Invested 12354. So that's the starting amount that you put in the bank or put in your business venture. It earned interest of AED. So the interest amount is I, 120.01 dirhams, and time is 4 years. Now I want you to notice they did not give us rate. So since they didn't give us rate, we will not be able to use this equation, and we will not be able to use this equation because both of those have rate in it. So what we will use instead is this equation. They're asking for the future value of your money, S. Just remember that P is always less than S, so we're looking for a number that will be bigger than that number. We'll use the formula S equals P plus I, and we will plug in the starting amount that we invested was 12354. The interest we earned, they told us, was 120.01. Then you just add those two together to get the future value of 12,474.01 dirhams. Okay, now you may have noticed we really haven't done any examples that are using this formula. What's special about the third formula is it finds the future value without first finding the interest earned. In fact, we're not actually touching this question, how much interest did you earn? We're just going straight from knowing the principal, the rate, and the time, and using that to find the maturity value or the future value directly. So we'll do some examples like that. Now you always do have the option to do it in 2 steps. First find the interest and then find the future value. But we don't have to if they don't ask for it. Here's the example. The loan is 7,000, so that would be the starting amount that we borrowed for 6 months. That's time equals 6/12, and the rate is 8%. and it says how much do they owe at the end. So they're asking directly for the future value. They did not ask for how much interest you have to pay, so we can skip that part and just directly use this formula, S equals P 1 plus RT, and then plug everything in, 7,000 times 1 plus 0.08 times 6 over 12, and you end up getting a future value of 7,280 dirhams. So if you borrow 7,000 under those terms, then when you pay it back, you will pay it back 7,280 dirhams. Let's do the second example. You borrow 25,000, so again, that's the starting amount P. The bank charges 6%, that's the rate. How much do you owe in 3 years? That's just time equals 3. 3 years. We no need to divide by anything because they gave us the time in years. So we'll use that same equation. If we want to know the future amount that you owe what you borrowed plus the interest you earned. So we would do P 1 plus RT, and we will plug in those numbers, 25,000, 1 plus 0.06 times 3 years, and we will get that we will owe at the end 29,500 dirhams. Okay, lastly, I just want to end. These are 2 more interesting ways to ask questions about simple interest. So remember from the formula sheet that S equals P times 1 plus RT. We'll need a variation of that, but let's look at the question itself. It's telling us now the maturity value is this amount. They're telling us the future value is 17,248, and they're asking us to go backwards and figure out, well, what was the initial investment? What was the starting amount? And they say the interest rate was 0.095, and then they also tell us it was 8 years, so T equals 8. Now, we don't directly have an equation P equals something with S and R and T, but we can manipulate this equation if we just take this entire bracket and divide it onto the other side, then we will get the equation we want. So the equation we want, and I would advise you just either memorize it or get comfortable doing the algebra. You're just going to take the S, the future value, and divide by 1 plus RT. So we are going to use this equation to go backwards and find what was the starting amount. So we'll say P equals S over 1 plus RT, and we put in the numbers 17,248 divided by 1 plus 0.095 times 8 years, and we will get that the initial investment was $9,800. So remember, when you're going backwards to find P should always be less than S. So in the future, we had 17,248, so we must have deposited 9,800 to start with. All right, let's do another example that's similar. They want to have 200,000. That means they don't have it now. That means they want it in the future. That's the future value is 200,000, and they want it on their daughter's 18th birthday. So that would be a time equals 18 years after she is born, because they want to pay for her university. So what should they deposit when she is born? At the very start, at the beginning, what should they deposit? And they're saying the rate is 7%. So again, we're going to try to find a number, of course, that's less than 200,000, because we want the starting amount. So that's the initial amount divided by 1 plus RT. I'm sorry, the future amount divided by 1 plus RT. So it's 200,000 divided by 1 plus 0.07 times 18 years. And we will get an initial investment of 88,495. It says 575, so that's 0.58 So what this means is if the family invests $88,495 when the baby's born and then doesn't touch it, leaves it alone under those conditions in the bank, when the baby turns 18, they will have $200,000 in order to pay for university.